amazing how God just works things out. When we were going to actually go to Gettysburg or to Hershey, little did I know at that time that basically David was showing. And so when we got there and we saw this, and I thought, wow, I actually get to see this whole sermon played out in front of us. And a lot of things that you read in the scripture and how they were placing all of those things. And you really get to see all of the scriptures as they're come to life. It's better than a pictorial Bible as they're playing forth all of this stuff. And so when I say welcome back, I'm glad you all joined us for the second part of this 5 smooth stones. Because when we read the story of David, and sometimes, I don't know how much you realize, but if you were to take a basketball court, and if you were to play a professional basketball, the rim is set at 9 feet or 10 feet. And you see these guys so used to, anymore, they don't have to because they're so tall, but used to, you would see these short guys that were like 5'10", 5'11", and they would hit the top of the key and come up to the free throw line, and then they were coming so fast, and they would just jump, and you would see them gracefully flying through the air, and the next thing you know, you would see them taking that ball with small hands, palming that thing and dunking it. And they were just a little less than 6 feet, but yet they were getting up 4 feet to get that ball over that rim and come down. And then you think about it. Here was Goliath, who was 9 feet 9 inches tall. He was 3 inches from the top of the rim. And when he put his helmet on, he would have been probably at the top of the backboard. That's how tall he would have been and standing. His armor was so heavy, they needed someone else to just carry parts of it. And you see all of this going on. And today we're going to go back to 1 Samuel chapter 17. And one of the things that we're going to talk about this morning is that you and I are going to face battles and struggles and giants. And I hear this so much that you really need to be careful. I hear people talk about, look at how much I've accomplished. Look at how much I've done. And who becomes the hero of the story? We do. Because we start giving the glory to ourselves. And the glory doesn't go to us. The glory goes to God. All the time you'll hear people say, boy, you really accomplished a lot. No, I haven't. God's accomplished a lot through me. Because if it was me doing it, I would have failed a long time ago. As a matter of fact, I did, have, and still will. And so will you. To our last breath, we're going to be fighting giants. Sometimes it may be a diagnosis that you got from the doctor. You don't like it. That's not what you thought it was going to be like. And someone comes up to you and says, well, I know what you're going through. I know how you feel. No, you don't. You know how you felt when you were going through your trial. But your trial and my trial, even though it may be the same name, it is not the same trial because we are different. And the lesson or the strength that God is trying to give me through the trial might be totally different than what you are being taught or what he's trying to give to you. So can I join alongside of you? Absolutely. Can I go through it with you? Absolutely. Do I have words of wisdom? Not always. But it isn't words of wisdom that you need. It's someone to walk alongside of you. And that's why God is there, to give him the glory. When you start talking about David and characteristics about him, sometimes you might say, well, he was an adulterer. He was a murderer. He was a king. He was a soldier. He was a husband. He was a father. He was a leader. He was afraid. He was strong. And all of these things you see. But you have to realize that there was one thing that God saw in David when he was a little boy that never, ever left him. That characteristic that was in that little boy as a shepherd, even through all of the failures and sometimes disappointing things in his life, there was one thing that God always found consistent in David. He was a man after God's own heart. And sometimes you say, well, how could he be a man after God's own heart? And look at all the things that he did. He's imperfect. You're imperfect. But my imperfection and your imperfection does not disqualify us from being a person after God's own heart. It's the inner part of us that God's looking at, not at the outward signs of everything. People see the outside and they judge you from the outside. God's not judging you from the outside, ladies and gentlemen. God is judging you from the inside out, because it is the inside that he's changing. When you got saved and I got saved, I don't know about you, but when I got saved, I still looked exactly the way I looked the moment before I was a sinner destined for hell. I still had brown hair, glasses. My hair was still curly. I still had on the same clothes on the outside. But on the inside, there was a new process that was going on that I wasn't even aware of, but it was going to show to the outside. And that's what God wanted. And so sometimes when we look at David, there's the one characteristic that you need to look at. And this is where David is known. When God said, I'm looking for someone after my own heart. And this, ladies and gentlemen, was David. You got to remember, he had a family. He had brothers. He had a dad. He had a mom. He had chores. I know some of you kind of look at me like, what is that? That's the things that you do because your kids won't. If you've got kids today, asking them to do chores, they have no clue what a chore is. To them, a chore is going to school. No. To us, going to school was a treat. You want to know why? Because you didn't have to do chores while you were at school. Hey, To me, it was vacation time. Every day for, 6 to 8 hours. This is what we got.
And there was homework.
Yeah. You also need to understand something about David. He wasn't abnormal and he wasn't superhuman. But he was called by God. And may I say this to you? No matter what people may think about you, no matter what Satan is telling you, you're not abnormal and you are not superhuman. I know some of you want to understand that you might have this big red S on your chest, but no, it isn't. We're not superhuman. We're human. So let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 12 through 28. It says, now David, he was the son of the Ephrathite from Bethlehem of Judea named Jesse. Jesse had 8 sons, and during Saul's reign was already an old man. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. Their names were Eliab, the firstborn, Abinadab, the next, and Shemaiah, the third. And David now was the youngest. So he had 8 sons, 3, the oldest, and David. It doesn't tell us about the middle ones, okay? 3 of them are at war with Saul, and then David is the youngest one. Okay? But look at this. But David kept going back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock in Bethlehem. So many times we get this thing in the story that this was the first time that David went, not according to the Bible. David, look at this, but David kept going. There was the 3, and then David were following Saul to war. Okay? But David kept going back and forth between his dad Jesse and Saul's army. He kept going back and forth from Saul to tending his father's flock in Bethlehem. Okay? Every morning and evening for 40 days. 40 days. That's a cool number. Let's see, 40 days was how many days it rained? How many years were they in the wilderness? 40 years. 40 was like a generation. Okay? So every morning and evening for 40 days the Philistine came forward, took his stand. One day Jesse had told his son David, take this half bushel of roasted grain along with these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Now, also take these 10 portions of cheese to the field commander. So see, even back then, they had bread and cheese to eat. Had to go along with their wine. Okay? That was their meal. Check on the well-being of your brothers and bring a confirmation from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David got up early in the morning, left the flock with someone to keep it, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had charged him. He arrived at the perimeter of the camp as the army was marching out to its battle formation, shouting their battle cry. Israel and the Philistines lined up in battle formation, facing each other. David left his supplies in the care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. When he arrived, he asked his brothers how they were. While he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistine battle line, shouted his usual words, which David heard. When all the Israelite men saw Goliath, they retreated from him, terrified. Previously, an Israelite man had declared, Do you see this man who keeps coming out? He comes to defy Israel. The king will make the man who kills him very rich and will give him his daughter. The king will also make the family of that man's father exempt from paying taxes in Israel. Do you understand? For 40 days, they've been coming back and forth. The Israelites on one side, the Philistines on the other. And there's a valley in between. Goliath would come down, and he would stand there. This humongous being of a person, huge, and would taunt them every day. And they would get scared and run. They were supposed to be fighters, but they were cowards. They were afraid of the giant. So Saul one day, he said, listen, if one of you will come and fight Goliath and kill him, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you riches. Riches galore. You will be rich for the rest of your life. He had a daughter. She's very beautiful. And he said, not only will I give you all the riches, I will give you my daughter in marriage. Not only will I take care of you, and you will have my daughter, I will also take care of your family. Your father will live out the rest of his life not paying any taxes. That's a cool deal. I would love to have been a young boy and not having to worry about anything for the rest of my life, just by taking out some big dude, by kicking him in the kneecap or something, you know? I mean, that's an easy task, you know? You always hear the old saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. You just got to run to get out of their way when they fall. Otherwise, they're going to fall on you and you're going to be squished. So what does he do? He says, so David spoke to the men who were standing with him. What will be done for the man who kills that Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he shall defy the armies of the living God? The troops told him about the offer, concluding, that is what will be done for the man who kills him. So David's oldest brother, Eliab, listened as he spoke to the men, and he became angry with him. Why did you come down here, little brother? He asked. Who did you leave the sheep with in the wilderness? I know your arrogance. You think you're better than us. Because remember, something had happened prior to this. And they were all mad at David. Okay? And we'll get to it in a minute. I know your arrogance and your evil heart. You came down to see the battle. This is what you did, David. So when you begin to look at all of these things, you need to understand that there was one thing out of this whole story that is important. And we told you already. He was called by God. God called him, okay? So when you read chapter 17, verses 12 through 28, this gives us a brief background of who David was, giving us some insight as to who he is. Number one, you learn David was young. He was the youngest of 8 sons. Okay? And maybe you remember the story. There was a prophet by the name of Samuel. Samuel was a prophet. Saul was the king. And Samuel anointed Saul. And in the anointing, he told Saul, because remember, the Israelites wanted to be like everybody else. They also wanted a king. And God says, you don't need a king. You got me. I'll take care of you. No, you don't understand. We want to be like everybody else around us. They've got kings. They're doing okay. We need a king. Somebody physical we can see. He says, you don't understand. You got me. You don't need a king. No, we need a king. He says, okay, fine. You need a king. I'll give you a king. But you'll regret it. So what they do? They chose Saul. Samuel comes to anoint Saul. And he told him this. He said, listen, as long as God abides in you and you abide in him, your kingdom will prosper. But the moment that you don't let God abide with you anymore, you're done. You're done. You're going to be miserable. Well, Saul started out great, but along the way, he got the big head. He was prospering. He was killing all of the other enemies. And everybody was loving him because he was killing all of the enemies. And everybody was screaming and hollering and yelling, yeah, go Saul, the king. He's a king. He's out there. He's killing them all. But unbeknownst to Saul, God told Samuel, Saul's going to lose his kingdom. You need to go over to Jesse, because one of his sons are going to be the king. So Samuel comes to Jesse and he says, bring me your sons. And Jesse brings out 7 sons and leaves David out in the pasture with the sheep, watching the sheep. And Samuel's going down through there from the oldest all the way to the end, looking at each one of them. And he says, not this one, not this one, not this one, not this one. Got all the way down to the 7th one, and he said, not this one. Jesse, have you got another son? Because God explicitly told me that one of your sons is going to be the king. And I've gone through everyone that you brought here to me, and none of these are the king. So do you have another son? Yeah, I got this little guy out watching the sheep. Go get him. You don't want him. He's a runt. He's a young. He's too young to be king. Don't let anybody ever tell you you're too young to do something. God will qualify you for what he's calling you to do. And sometimes it may be when you're a child, getting you ready for what's going to happen later on. So what did he do? He gets David in there, brings him there, and Samuel, that's the one. He anointed him king. And here's what he said. Don't any of you dare tell Saul, because the moment you tell Saul that the king, his successor, has already been anointed, he will come to kill you, your family, and David. So here they all are in battle. And here comes David. Their brothers know that he's going to be the king. He's already been anointed. Here he comes. For 40 days, they've been there. And here comes this little young pipsqueak who is not a soldier, but rather a shepherd taking care of sheep, who are the dumbest animals in the world. If you take one sheep and lead the first one over the cliff, guess what they'll all do? Go over the cliff. Why in the world does God call us his sheep? We love playing follow the leader, don't we? Without even doing Simon Says. We just go. But he was young. So, when we see this in David, look at 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse number 7. Samuel's looking at David and said, he's not tall, he's young, all of these things, you know. And don't you think that maybe we might want to pick out somebody that's kind of more king-like? Oh God. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his stature, because I've rejected him. Humans do not see what the Lord sees, for humans see what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart. You know what he sees? What he's created in you. What his plans for you are. The things that you and I don't even know exist. God's seeing that and laying it all out for us and hoping that our heart will remain to him and that we will hold on to him. So when you look at this, when God chose David, the youngest, it was because of what was going on inside. And do you understand? So many times we look at giants and we think that the giants that we're facing is on the outside. But may I say to you that the biggest giants that we face, ladies and gentlemen, are not the giants from the outside. They're the giants from the inside, are the giants that we face. We know they exist. We know they're there. But I can't see it. But I'm fully aware of them. And it happens so much. And what was God looking at? He was looking at what was going on internally in David. Remember, you were taught when you're little, you judge a book by its cover. Now, honestly, if you are to judge if you are to judge a book by its cover, the Bible is really not a pretty book. Most Bibles on the outside are very plain. It doesn't have, now they've made these new Bibles that got pictures all over them, and so it kind of catches your eyes, and draws you to it. Writers today, when they write these books, one of the most important thing is your book is going to be displayed with all of these other books. And every one of them is going to have a picture of something on the cover. They've all got some kind of saying on the cover. So in order to get someone's attention, you got to make your cover more appealing to the eyes than everybody else's book that's being displayed. There is as much work done on the artwork on the cover of a book sometimes as there is in the writing of the book, and sometimes even more. Because even if it's a known writer, they can't have the same cover on every one of the books. Because somebody looks at it and says, oh, I've already got that book. How? How do I know? By the cover. It's already there. So they have different covers. And sometimes you'll look at it and you'll see these people in a certain pose or a certain saying or whatever, or what somebody very important said about the book, you know? And they haven't read it yet. It hadn't even been published, you know, but they got to get it out there and get these things. And so what I say to you is this: you don't judge a book by its cover. You just can't do this. You see, but our tendency is to do that. Let's take you back a few years. To some of you, a few more than others. But remember a friend that you may have first met in school. And when you first met that person, you thought, there is no way I want to be friends with that person. Or maybe it's somebody that you've known from church. As I've shared with you, I have no clue what my wife saw in me 50-some years ago. I was not the best looking guy in the church. I was probably one of the ugliest. But I was more outgoing than the rest of them. A little bit more determined than the rest of them. Okay. Now, she could have chosen any of those other boys. And look at what she would have never gained. The best thing that ever happened to her in her life. But it's also mine too. It's reciprocal. In the very beginning, it was rough because she would break up with me every week. I was the weekend romance. You know, Monday through Friday, she was going to another school. She'd have another boyfriend. Come Friday, she'd break up with them. We're back together over the weekend. I don't even remember how many times anymore. We quit counting. But you would have never thought it. But that's what happens. There are sometimes we see people and we look at them and we place a judgment upon them. First impressions. You know what I do with first impressions that I get of people? I throw them away. Because why? I want the second impression, the third, because that's when it begins to start growing on you and you start looking. There are sometimes we get people with preconceived ideas and you say, well, no, I don't. Hold on a minute. The old adage, she's got blonde hair, so she must be what? Not too bright. She's got red hair, so she must what? Have a temper. She's 80 years old with brown hair. She must have dyed it. Maybe she didn't. Maybe it's still natural. You don't know. We judge it. Used to. If I'd met Linda 40 years ago and I saw all those tattoos, I would have thought she was a biker. You know? She might be, I don't know. But you judge people by first impressions, and you judge the book by its cover. And what he's saying is you don't do this. And sometimes what we do is we allow people to make judgment calls on us based upon their first impressions. And we get caught up into that being who we are. And may I say this to you? You are not what other people say you are. You are who God is wanting to make you. Other people don't know what God's doing in your life. Only you do. I have people come up to me every once in a while and say, Pastor, do you believe I'm saved? And I could say by all outward appearances and what I see, yes. But do I know for fact? No. Because I'm only judging from what I'm seeing that's coming to the outside. I don't know what's going on the inside. God does. I only know what's going on the inside of me. That's the only thing that I can validate. You can't validate it for me. Only me and God knows what's there. And he knows a lot more than I do, because he knows what's going to happen tomorrow if I'm still here, or what he wants me to be prepared for. Because there's going to be a giant tomorrow. There may be a giant before this church finishes that I don't know about, but he does. And so what's he doing? He's preparing us for those things, the same way as he did with David. Not only was he young, you got to think, he was looked down upon. And so many times we need to understand that God chose David for some great things. And God knew that David was going to come there that day, Goliath was going to come, and God was going to prepare him for that battle. And that Goliath was falling. But even though God knew all of those things, everybody is still looking down on David. It didn't stop them from doubting him. When David turned around and told them, okay, here is Goliath coming and saying, hey, send me someone to fight, and here's what I'll do. If he kills me, not injures me, if he kills me, then they will all serve your God. That's cool. That's what we want. So he comes up here and he says, come on, let's talk about who's your God that you serve and you think is so mighty. Come on, fight me. And everybody takes off running. And here's this little shepherd boy that comes up there and says, hey, you uncircumcised Philistine, how dare you speak about God that way? I'll fight you. Because my God is in charge of this battle. My God is. So he's going out to fight. Saul calls him up there and says, what are you doing? Hey, I'm going to go fight him. Well, hey, listen, you're a shepherd. You're not even dressed for battle. You got here. I need to give you my shield and my helmet, and I'll give you my sword bearer. And you go out there and you fight with armor. And David says, I can't fight in that stuff. I haven't even used that stuff. I wouldn't know the first thing to do with that helmet. Knowing David, he would have the helmet on backwards. He would have the shield to the back, because it's pretty big. I'm going to run, and I want to make sure he can't stab me in the back and knock me down or something. And if I'm going to run, I definitely don't want all that stuff on me. This guy's pretty big. He can't move very quickly, but I'm going to make sure that I can really, really run. And so what did David do? He says, no, hold on a minute. I was tending the sheep one day, and a lion came up, and I slew it. Bear came up. I took care of that. David could take that slingshot and put a stone in there, and he was very accurate and knew what he was doing. I'll give you a little prelude. He picked up 5 stones for a reason. Goliath had 4 relatives. There was 5 of them there, giants. And you'll see later on, if you continue to read the story, that they ended up killing the other 4 giants of Gath. So he was going to take out the whole 5 of them, not just Goliath. Let me tell you something. When God equips you, ladies and gentlemen, he's equipping you not just for this battle, but the next battle, and the next battle, and the next battle. Why? Because God wants us to be victorious. Not finish one battle and say, hey, I can't do this anymore. So what does he do? He said he was young. But look at 1 Timothy. They'll have it up here. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse number 12. Don't let anyone despise your youth, but set an example for the believers in speech and conduct and love and faith and in purity. There were so many times growing up that I really hated being the young preacher. Because the young preacher, you don't know anything. You're not seasoned enough. You haven't learned enough yet. You need some more chicken underneath your belt. You need to go to some more dinners. You need to do this. You need to do that in order to understand people better or to preach better or do this better. You got to learn. Sometimes that's correct. Yes, you do learn. But let me say this to you. Paul was talking to Timothy and he says, listen, don't let people make fun of your youth. What you need to do is you need to set an example. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, I've always loved kids. Teaching kids that you can make a difference. You don't have to be an adult to make a difference in the world. I was watching the news this week, and they were having the monster trucks, okay? And there was this one little boy, 11 years old, and he has cancer, but he loved the monster trucks. So he went out, and they bought just a small monster truck, and he started putting emojis on the monster truck. And they were emojis that shared about his feelings, about his cancer treatment that he's going through at the age of 11, that he'd been going through for 5 years, from age 6. And he was at St. Jude there. His mother, somebody saw it, and they got this. So he was on the TV show, and they were talking to him about this and this monster truck and all of this stuff. And they were having the monster jam for the monster trucks. And they had him here at the stadium. And he had his truck in his hand. And they said, we got a surprise for you. They brought in this monster truck with the emojis on it that looked exactly like what he had designed. And they said, this is for you. And by the way, we have raised over $500,000 in your name for St. Jude. An 11-year-old little boy started at the age of 6, making a difference in the lives of other people. How much will that $500,000 do in the research of children facing cancer? You see little kids that stand out there with lemonade or doing this or doing that, not to get money, but basically for a cause. And sometimes we see the example of young children. We were going. Just hang with me. I know I'm running past, but it's just to let you understand. Hershey, Milton Hershey. Okay, this guy failed, went bankrupt 3 times in developing chocolate that people would eat. It had to be just right, okay? He failed. Got it perfected, and then was selling it, and then all of a sudden the price of sugar went skyrocketing. And guess what you need for chocolate? Sugar. Guess what happened? Failed. Price of sugar went up again. Failed. 3rd time, price of sugar is going up. You know what he did? He went to Cuba and bought 600,000 acres or 60,000. Let's just say 60,000. 60,000 acres of sugar that he processed himself for his sugar to make his chocolate. So he was not dependent upon anybody else. Him and his wife couldn't have children. So you know what they did? They took in 4 orphans, boys. 4. Brought them in, set up a house for them, brought in a married couple. While he would run his business, they gave them a home. Today, there is a huge orphanage for kids who come that are placed in the system with parents that don't want them. They start there in kindergarten. They stay there until they graduate. When they graduate, they are given a suitcase and $100 because he said that's all I had was a suitcase and $100 to go make a difference in the world. Any child that comes through that orphanage, and then they have also are given to others, are given $95,000 scholarships to finish college. At the 8th grade, they not only decide if they're going to go to college, but they also have to decide, every one of them, a technical skill that they want to master. They have to master that technical skill within the 4 years or they don't graduate. Not just an education, but a skill. And this, they don't pay for. Every bit of it is free. You want to know why? What he did was when he died, since they didn't have any children, he took every bit of stock that he owned and gave it to this foundation. So this foundation that was like $6 million when he died in 1947 is now worth $60 billion. It is self-sufficient. And they are building more homes for more kids, bringing in other parents to help kids all along. That was someone that nobody ever dreamed that was able to do something, and he made a difference. And you know, he was a Mennonite, and he taught them faith, family, and love. Every child that comes through there is taught those basic principles. He's still making a difference. He only went to school to the 3rd grade and made a difference. So don't tell me that you can't make a difference no matter how young you are, how old you are. You are never too old or too young to make a difference when you face the giants in your life, because God's got them out there. All right, let's give you last point and we're done. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse number 28. And this only takes 5 minutes, okay? David spoke to the man who was standing with him. What will be done for the man that who kills the Philistine, removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the Lord? What was he? He was God-focused. You know why we fail? Our focus gets lost. We start looking around and seeing the giants all around us instead of staying focused on what it is that God wants us to do, and that is to follow him. As long as we stay focused on God, ladies and gentlemen, Satan will attack you, the giants will come, and you need to understand something, that God will always let you be victorious. And that's why we need to stay God-focused. Eugene wrote me a letter, not a letter. He was talking about some things that he was just meditating on, and here's what he said, and I appreciate it. He says, I'm writing to express my thought on a few subjects as I was meditating one evening. First, since your heart surgery, it is obvious that God has set your feet on a firm path. Hold true to this path and lead this church boldly forward as God is prompting you with his renewed and focused spirit that he has given you. Thank you for saying that you see this. Well, it seems like you have a new spirit. Things are moving and popping for me, not as boring, sorry. He said, but second, we should be done using COVID as an excuse not to come to church or participate in society. And he is exactly right. We have become so isolated from each other. And we can't blame this anymore. Because let me say this to you. COVID is not going away. Okay? I wish they would quit using the word, you need to get your vaccination, because it is not a vaccination. It is a shot. It is like a flu shot. The flu has never gone away. It killed millions of people in 1917. They developed a flu shot. But guess what? People still die from the flu. You haven't heard the last couple of years how many people have died from the flu. But let me tell you, some of the numbers that have died from COVID died from the flu. They just don't tell you because that doesn't make the news and they can't control you. But I guarantee you that come this year when flu season hits, I don't know if they're going to give us the raw numbers because they're going to probably try to throw monkeypox in there now. You know. I know. And it's just another way of controlling and making people afraid. Okay? And what I'm saying is, yes, COVID is real. Yes, people die. Flu is real. Yes, people die. Okay? Pneumonia is real. And yes, people die. Heart attacks are real. And yes, people die. But that doesn't mean that we can't coexist outside with other people and interact with other people. That's what God made us to do. Because let me tell you something. The biggest death that is happening in America today is not COVID. The biggest death that is happening today is children who are committing suicide because they haven't been able to socially interact with other children. They're being taught that you choose who you want to be. I have never, ever seen anyone been able to take and split an XY chromosome from one person and put the other one in there. It doesn't happen. Call it what you want, but it is yes, black and white. And we need to quit listening to these stupid people who call themselves experts. Because the only expert that I know that is an expert on all of the subjects is a guy, he's not a guy, but is God. Okay? He is real. He knew what he was doing when he did it, and he ain't changing it. Because we don't like it, he's saying, I didn't ask you. You weren't around when I created it, so I don't need your input right now on what I created. Because as a matter of fact, look at what you've done to what I created. You made a mess out of it. And so that's neither here nor there. We need to be God-focused, ladies and gentlemen. And as I shared with you, I don't know what it is. When you hit a certain age, you become focused on something. And you realize that life passes by very quickly. And you don't have a lot of time to do a lot of stuff. And so you got to choose what's important. And that's why I say, be God-focused. Because when you become God-focused, you will understand what's important in life. And it may be that what's important today is to call somebody up and sit down and just talk to them. Maybe that's important because guess what? They may not be there tomorrow. Well, you don't understand. I got to go to the grocery store. No, you don't. You probably got enough food in your cupboards that you could probably eat out of there, okay? Do something else or become understanding that God is telling us, be focused. Even though David failed, he was still God-focused to the end. All the way to the end. When he called Solomon to his bedside, when he knew that he was dying and Solomon was going to be king, he told him, stay focused. He didn't. He didn't stay focused. But guess what? Even though he didn't stay focused, the words of Solomon reigned through all of the ages. And you know what? Some of the words of Solomon are used not in church, but in buildings, in academia. Sayings that moms and dads say all the time. The words of Solomon. Why? Because the Bible says, God says, he was the wisest man that ever lived. Why? God told him, Solomon, I will grant you one thing. What do you want? It wasn't money. I mean, to me, he was the modern day Elon Musk. That guy's got so much money, he don't need any more money. He's just ticking everybody off. He's being cool. You know, he can say what he wants to say. Solomon didn't need the money. He knew if he had the wisdom, that would make him rich. Rich beyond comparison. Because guess what? How many people ever talk about how much that Solomon was worth when he died? Do you know the number? I don't see it recorded anywhere. I'm sure somebody probably tried to calculate it based upon a certain number at a certain point in time. But guess what? Everybody's talking about how smart he was. Why? Because God gave him a gift. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, eternity is not going to be based upon how much money you made. But you know what your eternity is going to be based on? How many lives you impacted down here. You see, you may be leading the next Billy Graham to the Lord. You may be leading the next missionary that's going to go to the other side of the world, that might lead the last person before God calls the end. That may be yours. But do we act like it? Or do we believe it?